I'm reading Heidegger right now.
Oh my God.
I'm reading Being and Time. Actually, I finished all my assigned reading so I can read Heidegger more because we had an introductory book to Heidegger's work, and I got so compelled by it that I had to read the man himself. And uh, it's very dense. It's
Yeah.
very difficult reading, and it's very profound. And I think that what he's saying actually overlaps with some of the places that you touch on, especially in the phenomenology section of it, where it's what is it like to be a human? How do we actually experience this being? Yeah, we can create these abstract mathematical and scientific concepts, but what are we actually experiencing? And it's very meditative, the whole book so far. Have you read it?
I have, but again, we're talking about in my 20s, and
Right.
I'm
Yeah.
60 now. So yeah, I have
Yes.
I
Yeah.
have
Long time.
a memory of it. I haven't been back to it.
Yeah.
Um, I do carry. Heidegger was said to have two favorite questions, and I love them so much because they're kind of my questions that I carry them around. And one of them is why something, not nothing,
Uh-huh.
and then
Yeah.
the other one, which is my real favorite, why this and not that.
Right.
And there's something incredibly profound about those two questions, that's the Heidegger I've carried with me. But tell me, from you've just read it, what is it that when you say it
Well,
overlaps, or what is it that's so
it's
profound about it?
it's a slog. I mean, it's like sometimes I have to read the same paragraph 4 or 5 times because
Yeah,
his use of language is so unconventional. Even the translator in the introduction wrote that even Germans have a hard time understanding how he uses the language, because it's just he's flipping things on their head. He's taking things from a totally different angle. He's not even talking about human beings as human beings. He's using the word Dasein, which essentially means a being that is aware that it's being,
yeah,
right? But what's profound about it is he's asking the question, what does it mean to be Dasein? What does it mean to be this being that's aware that it's being? And he's basically looking back at the history of philosophy and saying that there's an ontological fallacy that we've failed to tackle. And we've carried on with the sciences and the metaphysics without understanding what it actually means just to be. Like we haven't started from where we are. We've kind of hopped over it, so to speak. We've skipped a step. And so he's not saying that these sciences and disciplines are not valuable, but what he is saying is that they're disconnected from the phenomenological experience of being a human. And so he has a pretty harsh criticisms for Descartes and Immanuel Kant and the early Greek philosophers because he thinks that they did make this mistake. And so he's coming back to base and saying, well, what does it just mean to be here? What does it mean to navigate the world as a human being? And he has this one term called taking care. And he says we're always taking care, which means that we're always involved in some sort of goal or some sort of directed activity that we're trying to fulfill. For example, right now we're having a conversation, so that's taking care for to what end? Why are we having? There's so many, and then what resources are we using? The computer, the keyboard, the microphone, and then the what for. And so he's really just showing that at the base of being human, we can actually say a lot about what it is just on observation alone. But because Dasein has the tendency to conceal itself, we have to reveal the basics of consciousness through observation and through deep inquiry, kind of like a Socratic method, because otherwise what he's saying is what gets missed is this basic experience of just what is being. It's incredibly dense and difficult and hard to explain, but I'm really getting a lot out of it. At least, if nothing else, I'm understanding the philosophers he's responding to, and I'm understanding the where he's splitting off from them and where he's agreeing with them. And so it's a good read just to broaden my own education, but I'm finding it very meditative.
Well, interestingly, um, I mean, this is just an aside, really, from me that when I study the continental philosophers, I found them all to be somewhat like that. and that there was a very interesting contrast between the Anglo-American tradition, which seemed to be all about attempts at clarity, but very dry and not really dealing with the depths of things, and the continental philosophers seemed really interested in the depths of things, but lacked clarity and seemed to delight in as if somehow the more difficult it became, the deeper it was. And part of what I want as my paralogical thing, I guess, is it feels like I want that same clarity which the Anglo-American tradition developed, applied to the sort of content that the phenomenologists and the continental tradition was willing to look at.
Yeah. I mean, yeah, there's this opaqueness and this obscurity in these, when you pick up the book, it might be the most difficult book I've ever read. I've heard Hegel's no peach either. But
yeah, Hegel's difficult. I've got to hear about Hegel.
Yeah, but yeah, it's almost like my cousin, who's also, I would consider him a philosopher, says it's almost like they have to keep up in this status game with each other of, who can be the most intellectual and aloof, and the more complicated the better, and who can be the least accessible. It's like it's almost like a status sign of intelligence, and
So my attempt, Brian, what I do when I'm doing when I'm walking is to do the opposite of that. It's to get it to the point where I can say it so clearly to myself that there's a chance I can say it clearly to somebody else. So here you go. Let me try it right now. This is what I was thinking about today. And it's to do with being, which is why I thought you might be interested, because being is the topic of my meditations right now. Because the big shift for me, which has already been precursed it was already there in Soul Story, but it really challenges my older work, is that in the spiritual world that I move in, there's a view that, materialism is very narrow, doesn't, address all of the psychic depths of life. So that's no good. So what's the alternative? Well, the alternative is...
Sorry, hold on a second.
That's right.
All right.
I should do that with mine as well.
The
alternative is idealism, the idea that consciousness, it's all consciousness, and consciousness is the base, and this is all arising in consciousness. And I have gone along with that with a lot of my early books, because that's what everyone was doing. And so it felt like, that kind of makes sense. And I was writing about traditions. But since Soul Story, I just think it's completely wrong. That consciousness is an emergent quality of the universe.
We didn't start with consciousness.
No, we've ended up with consciousness. We didn't start with it, and so then I'm looking at what would you characterize as the beginning? And I went with Hegel's word and called it spirit in Soul Story. But I actually think now I'm completely sold on the word being, and so what I've been doing today is just looking at my experience and going, okay, so if this is an emergent universe, what is the primal quality from which everything is emerging? And it seems to me that there is one quality which everything has, and that's the quality of being. And even the emptiness of space has the quality of being, and it has no other qualities. And so being itself is formless, and it's arising as this emergent process of form. And then you get these two words which go right back to the Greeks, which I love, but I'm using them in a different way, but which is being and becoming. So my latest description for what I'm seeing is, this is the being in the process of becoming. That's what this is. So you've got a formless ground of something which exists but has no other qualities, and therefore is the potential for every quality. It can take on any quality, is in the process of taking on ever more emergent qualities, and it's happening right now as we're speaking. It's another. This is never happened before. This has never happened before. This has never happened before. This has never happened before. And it's constantly doing that. And as it's doing that, it's arising on more and more and more emergent levels over long periods, but also in our own lives. In the journey of the soul, it's exponential. It happens pretty fast, really.
Yeah.
So for me, funny you should mention, Heidegger, because I've come down to, right, okay, so the ground is being is by far the best word. and it has that formless quality,
Yes.
or it has no qualities and is therefore formless, is probably better to say, which
It
is
has
the
no
great misconception.
qualities. Is that when you say it has no qualities? Is that because it's so ubiquitous across everything that
Yeah, what I'm
you can't
looking
say
at is
like this is a being that has different qualities than the microphone as a being?
exactly,
Is it just
exactly.
being is everywhere? Is that kind of the
That's what I'm.
angle?
That's what I'm basically suggesting is that that what in certainly in spiritual philosophy you get this idea of the ground where it's all arising
Yeah.
from. What's
Uh-huh.
the primal thing? And
So
often that's put as consciousness, but I suggest it's better to see it as something which exists
yes.
but has no other qualities other than existing, and that
Yeah.
is in a process of becoming all of these different qualities.
That's
So
so fascinating,
being
Tim.
and becoming.
Yeah. It's just so fascinating because the consciousness, it's what is consciousness? Because to some people, now we look at like theories like panpsychism. Like is there something that it's like to be a rock, for example? And does consciousness involve cognition, or is consciousness part of isness, part of being? What I'm hearing you're saying is that no, consciousness is not a given. Consciousness it's a developmental emergent property of the universe. Is
Well,
that
I think the first thing is that what I notice with the work I've been doing on consciousness is that it's obviously the word is used in lots of different ways by different people,
yes.
and even more confusing, it's used in two diametrically opposite ways, and often people slide between these opposites without even noticing they're doing it. So, consciousness, often in science, is used to refer to the contents of your experience, of your conscious experience. So consciousness is this, or sometimes it's just the psyche. But also in spirituality, you get the idea that consciousness is like a pure subjectivity that's witnessing
Yes.
experience.
Yes.
So on the one hand, it's the experience, and on the other hand, it's the experiencer, and it kind of slides between these two. And so I think it doesn't matter which you use, but I'm aware of that.
Well, it must be both, right? Because there are contents and then there's awareness of
Well,
those contents.
I think that here's where I've ended up with it, and partly Carl Jung is to do with this,
Yeah.
because what strikes me is that if I want to understand consciousness actually as I experience it, then I have to understand that I am conscious and unconsciously experiencing the world and the psyche.
Yes. Yeah.
And so consciousness cannot be the pure subjectivity, because I'm consciously and unconsciously experiencing the world. I mean, I'm asleep at night, the alarm clock rings, I wake up. I wasn't conscious of it, but I obviously heard it because it woke me up.
Yeah.
So to understand consciousness, it feels like you need to understand it in relationship with unconscious experience. So
Yes.
So where I've got to, I mean, hopefully I can do this clearly. It's kind of all fresh for me. Is a kind of, it's like panpsychism, but not the same. So panpsychism, I don't like the idea that everything's got soul or rocks are conscious. Doesn't make any sense to me. I just sounds
Okay.
not. But if you imagine that arising from being into becoming, you've got this process of differentiation, of things taking on qualities, which is time.
Yes.
Once you've got something which is individual, whether it's a hydrogen atom, let's say one of the early things, a hydrogen atom and a helium atom,
Yes.
these are individual. And because they're individual, they have a relationship with the whole. They're reading the whole. They're electrochemically reading what's going on around them. So that right from the beginning, once there is something, you get this primal duality of subject and object, which is simply that the part is in relationship with the whole.
Yes.
And so it seems that what I'm suggesting is a kind of a pan-subjectivity, and that subjectivity and objectivity emerge together completely.
Yeah.
There's no just objective, there's no just subjective. There's not just like it's all consciousness or it's all matter. It's like
Right.
the two are constantly in relationship. And that what's going to happen, and I can go into that in a minute if you want me to, but what's going to happen is that subjectivity is going to evolve into this experience we're having now. It's
Right.
so we're going to get electrochemical subjectivity is going to turn into sensory subjectivity, is going to turn into conceptual subjectivity in the psyche.
Uh-huh. So that
Does that make sense?
yeah, and that really came across well in Soul Story, I thought.
Good.
Let me tell you where I'm at, because I'm struggling with the idea of consciousness now for several months, and I think I'm in a different place than you are. Maybe you can help me further my thinking, because where I'm at is I'm in this kind of relativistic place where the consciousness, I'm the object to your subjective consciousness, right? So the word, even the term unconscious, implies an I that is conscious and is not conscious of something else. But does that necessarily mean that the I that's not conscious of the other consciousness isn't, or the other thing that's unconscious? It's only unconscious relative to my subjectivity, to the part of me that's in that I. But when I'm dreaming, is that really unconscious, or is it just a different form of consciousness from different aspects of creative being? And we call it unconscious because of what we call our ego subjectivity. It's alien to it. It's not actually a part of that narrativity in our mind, our story that we're telling ourselves about Tim, about Ryan. And so I'm in this weird place with it where I'm like, well, who am I, the person who's quote unquote conscious, to say that there's not other forces living within me or, in the world that don't have their own subjective experience, just because it's different, just because does that make sense where I'm going with that?
Yeah. So the bit I shared earlier, as you rightfully said, that's the base in Soul Story. So this new element that's making me want to add something, there's the metaphysical stuff, but this is the more practical thing, came from what I'd said in Soul Story was simply, and then consciousness arises as this developing subjectivity. And then, like you said, yeah, but what is that?
Right.
And how does it arise? So and this will come, I'll put this forward and then apply it to what you've just said, because I think it really helps. And I think the mistake with consciousness is that really it's a verb. It's something we do. It's not really a thing at all. Uh-huh. It's a reification of a verb. So play this out as a very simplistic but hopefully deep scenario. When time streams move, when biology arises, when life emerges, for the very first, with life comes death. So like at every stage, when new things arrive, they don't hold together for very long. And in the biology phase, they still don't hold together for very long, do they? They just arise and then they collapse and they don't survive. So with biology, for the very first time, you've got what you could call an agenda, which is that any form of life needs to take in things to keep it alive and keep out things that want to kill it, and it needs to reproduce. Yeah. Now, once you've arrived at the biological level, 10 billion years into evolution, the amount of information that's being taken in is gigantic compared to, the hydrogen atom.
Yes.
Some of that information is really, really important, and the vast majority of it isn't. So
right, so we don't have to pay attention to everything that's happening all the time. Like, I don't hear the cars out on the road right now because they're going all the time.
Okay, so here is my...
That's a brain function, right? That's a
on a biological level. Let's forget the psyche for a minute. Let's imagine that hasn't even evolved yet. This is purely primitive sensation. What I want to suggest, and it's so simple, it's kind of cheeky, is that what consciousness is paying attention. It's that what's happened is that in an evolutionary way, forms of life have worked out how to prioritize information. And information which is prioritized will become this. Yes. And information which is not prioritized is all the rest. And that by the time you've reached us, we'll come on to the psyche later, let's just keep with sensation. I am paying you attention. I can see the color of your shirt. I'm not paying attention to what's behind me, but now I am, because I can see it in the camera. Yeah. And so wherever I put my attention, I'm conscious. And wherever I don't put my attention, it's unconscious.
Yes.
And so with that simple insight, and that's going to evolve, and we can get into why that is going to happen, but that also is taking place For us, on the level of the non-material psyche, the transmaterial level. And I think what's happening in dreams is you are no longer paying attention. You don't, in dreams, you stop paying attention altogether to the sensory world. At which point, your attention can either just rest in emptiness, or it goes to the imagination. It goes into the psyche, and you can have these other worlds, which suddenly become so vivid, they're real. And you put your attention goes elsewhere.
It's so interesting because, and I'm sorry to interrupt here.
No, don't.
This is an important place. With the place, everything you're saying is beautifully put and understood. But I still am struggling with the word unconscious because it's so relative to the word I.
Okay, so let's go through the word. So what's the I?
Well, just one more thing here.
Okay.
Who's to say that the figures in the dream are not an autonomous, creative aspect with their own intelligence and perhaps consciousness? I mean, it just seems to, and I could be totally wrong about this, but it just seems to me such a monocentric viewpoint to say that there's a word such as the unconscious, because it's so relative to my narrativity. Whereas the figures in my dreams, the beings out in nature, I just don't know what it's like to be them. And I actually don't know what it's like to be the aspects of my brain physiology that are sorting and organizing what's important to my prefrontal cortex attention and what can be stored in other places as just going on. And, I no longer hear the sounds of the road until they're either useful or threatening to me. But that, to me, that still indicates that I'm only focused on one aspect of being, and that aspect is I, story, narrative, this property of Ryan Holsapple that's happening all the time. But there's so many other things going on, and if I say that those things are unconscious, I feel like I'm writing a script that I don't actually know. I don't actually know that. That's where I struggle, Tim.
Okay, so there's two things that you seem to be saying there. One is whether they are themselves conscious.
Yes. Yeah.
And that's a completely separate thing, I think. Yeah. So just hold that one for a minute. Interesting, okay. Very interesting thing. Because the other one I think is much simpler. With the other one is like, well, what I'm suggesting is you are unconscious of what you're not paying attention to, and if you pay attention, you become conscious of it. So
yeah, that's simple. I get that.
So that there and who is paying attention?
Exactly.
Well, I would suggest everything is a time stream, an individuated aspect of the one. And yes. I am an individuated time stream. There's a biological level of this, which is the body, and then there's a soul level or psyche level, which is made of everything that time stream has ever been, experienced, done. It is that time stream. The past exists. So that the universe is perceiving through that past this. And if I look back into especially on the psychological level, on the psyche, if I look back into my past, I can see my own soul, my own past, most of which I'm unconscious of, most of which was unconscious at the time, but I can make it conscious, and I can look back, and there's a collective soul. There's all of the past of all of humanity there as well, which I think is what Jung was looking at.
Yes.
And then within that, you can start finding what he called the archetypes, which is like first thoughts, very formative thoughts, and they're all unconscious until you go, I make them conscious.
But he also called them autonomous complexes of the unconscious. Autonomous is a key word there. It implies some sort of driving force that it has its own agency.
Well, there's two things. It's tricky, isn't it? I think because certainly I would say that one of the key meanings, I think, with Jung, I'm not a Jung expert, but one of the key meanings is it's not just your personal thing.
That's right.
It exists bigger than you, and it does because you're collecting back into something collective there.
Yes.
And I think, on every level, our individuality reaches into something collective. So you're reaching back, and it's not just like, oh, my mum, it's the mother, which is everyone's mum or whatever, that kind of thing.
Mm-hmm.
And then there's the other question, which is what you're asking, which is, could they be conscious? Are they individual entities which are conscious?
Yeah, like, is there something that it's like to be a neuron?
Yeah. I think there's something that it's like to be a cell and maybe a particular neuron. I think there's something there's like to be an atom.
See, to me, that would be conscious.
No, I don't think there's.
Well, just to me, I mean, as far as the way I define consciousness, maybe there's a definition problem.
I would say, well, consciousness is with knowledge that you know it's happening. That you know.
Okay, I see. So that's a whole different, because I've heard it defined as something that it's like to be. That's just consciousness. That's
you could say, and you know what? I don't think there's what there's like to be.
That you don't. Okay.
I think that that's a lovely phrase from Thomas Nagel, isn't it? And from What's It Like to Be a Bat? And
yes,
it's a great phrase. But my sense is, look, we're looking that's going to arrive with biology. And
now this is really helpful, Tim, because now I'm getting where you're saying is that for you, consciousness, there's a knowing involved. There's a real awareness of and an ability to look at it and see it, and there's a human aspect to that maybe other beings
and maybe pre-human too, but it's definitely here for us. So that's why I chose the word subjectivity. I think there is a subjectivity because an atom is relating to the universe. I think there's a subjectivity to crystals. There's a subjectivity to very, 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 very simple biological entities. Yes. And they will start to develop. That subjectivity is getting richer and richer and richer. And at a certain point, the processing of the individual of the information is starting to differentiate what will become conscious. That prioritizing of information and the rest. And that is going to increase for us and as it does, you get a kind of a focused subjectivity or an intensify. And that's what we've got. It's like it becomes this. Yes. The subjectivity takes off, and it's very different, isn't it? If I think about my unconscious awareness, it's like, well, what is it? It's nothing, but it is there. It's just that this is so, where I put the attention, it's really gone to town. And now you can do that, and we can do that in with the sensory world. We can do it with the other world. Then the question then becomes for me, is there a subjectivity to a rock? And I would say, no, there's not.
Okay.
I would say there's a subjectivity. I would say the rock is a pile of little bits that have subjectivity. It's a collective. It's a collection. Is there a subjectivity to the sea? No. I would suggest not. But there is a subjectivity to every single H2O atom. All the molecule, everything's making up the sea has a subjectivity, but as a whole, it's not integrated. So it's responding as a collective, not as an individual.
So you're saying that humans have it's different.
And not just humans, but that's what marks out the cell. The great breakthrough of the cell is that it took the collective and turned it into an individual. It unividuated into something. The great achievement of H2O was it took oxygen and hydrogen and it turned it into one thing.
Yes.
It was completely new and different. And that one thing was relating to the universe as one thing. Mm-hmm. But get a whole pile of H2O and they influence each other and it's a collective thing, but it's responding as a collective, not as one thing. So
and explain to me how human beings are different.
Human beings seem different because what's happening is that each level where it unividuates, if it unividuates objectively into one integrated whole, it also unividuates subjectively into one integrated whole. Mm-hmm. So when you've got you've got cells which are all got subjectivity, and then you get multicellular organisms in which they become an integrated new whole. That all of that objective individuality is subsumed within a greater whole. And so is all of the subjectivity. And then what emerges is a whole new level of objectivity, which never existed before, and a whole new level of subjectivity, which never existed before. And for us, that's happened on a really grand level.
Like love.
Love is another thing altogether. I think. Okay, that's a big.
Is that what you're talking about, though? Is that the
No,
natural conclusion to what emerges as the finality of where we are now?
I think that the love is itself evolving. Love is. I think that's a different question.
Different. Tell me how it's different, because what I was following was in your theory of emergence. Uh, Somehow it's freed us up as complex biological creatures to experience psyche
Yeah.
and mind, and then that's led to this newest thing called love. So tell me, from what you were saying, I was trying to follow that to its natural conclusion, but
Okay.
it
Well. Okay.
sounds like I'm in a different track than you are. So tell
No.
me
No.
what I
No.
missed.
I just think you probably jumped a few
I jumped
steps.
really far. Yeah.
Yeah. So
I
you
jumped,
can see
I jumped very
love emerging. It's like
yeah.
the people say, and I love this thought, that love started with fish.
Right.
Because one of the current theories is that there was a certain point where a certain fish, for the very first time, didn't eat its babies, which fish
Oh.
do. It was like,
Oh.
there's the babies, oh, that's food. They eat them. And at a certain point, it didn't eat its young, it defended its young.
Mm.
And it was a sense of connectivity to something outside themselves. And that from that has come all of the mammalian, the way that mammals care for their young, which is a form of, connection to something outside, which will turn into. And then when you reach the level that we're playing at, you get that ability with psyche to act, when you come into communion with another soul, there's this enormous love which develops, and when you come into communion with the whole universe, there's this big love. So you can see that connectivity. It's like having individuated. You then start seeing how it can connect.
Yeah, it's beautiful. That's one of the things I love about your work, is that it's taking what we know about science, evolution. It's taking the spiritual traditions and the different wisdom that's been accumulated throughout time, and it's piecing things together in a globalistic and holistic way, and it makes sense. I mean, of course, we can't falsify it, but it's a needed narrative in a time where I think we're at a loss of meaning. We're at a loss of soul. We're at like Nietzsche famously declared, God is dead. And we can see the effects of that type of mentality in our society, where we're struggling to find purpose. We're struggling to find meaning. We're struggling to find a tribe. We're easily ideologically possessed by politics and things like this. And to be able to create a theory that can hold that experience and carve us out a new way forward, it's necessary right now. And
it's so couldn't absolutely. Yeah. So I God wasn't dead. He was just having a snooze. He's
right.
back. He's back.
Right. Exactly.
It's back.
Yeah. What I've really paid close attention, Tim, to the way you interact with listeners, the way you interact with your conversation partners and your What is Life interviews. And you are so careful to make sure that things make sense. First of all, like you're not new age, airy fairy, at least not by my definition. And also careful to make sure that there's room for the heart, so that we're not oppressing ourselves with an over logical analysis of being, because in some ways being speaks for itself. And I think that's what Heidegger is saying in his part of what he's saying in Being and Time, is that being speaks for itself. Everybody, we don't need to squash it into a theory or put it into a mathematical equation. Like, there is something that it's like to be, and it's okay to allow that there to be there. Somehow you managed to strike this balance in a really coherent way, and I appreciate that about your work.
Well, I'm very, very pleased.
Yeah,
hey,
good.
So let's just go full circle, and because this is actually what I've been doing on my walk, which relates to what you just said about Heidegger, because like I said, it's what matters is the experience which comes from the understanding. So what intrigues me now is like, okay, so what happens? Try it with me. If you take your attention, the bit that consciousness, and you place it on the ubiquitous nature of being, this formless presence which is everywhere, that huge spacious everywhere-ness. Because that's your being.
Mm.
And when you go, and the great mystical teaching is that if you do it outside in the, if you do it with your experience, it's the space in which everything is arising. So you're paying attention to the space rather than the things, but the space contains everything.
Mm-hmm.
And then if you come back and you go right back into you, but what's that subjective being? The same thing. You go back and you go back, and there's something which isn't an experience, except only the experience of being, which is witnessing all of this. And again, you come back into this incredible formless presence, which is the everything. And there's you and me, two delightfully individual human beings, but we're human beings, and there's that universality of being.
Yeah. What was your saying? We go from unconscious oneness to conscious difference to conscious oneness. Is that?
Yeah.
How does that go?
Unconscious oneness through conscious separateness or individuality to conscious oneness. So that the where it starts, or you could, using the word being, same thing, you could say, look, it starts from unconscious. It's being, but it's unconscious. That's the nature of the universe, and it's still there. Most of it is still being, but unconsciously. And then it has emerged and emerged and emerged, and then it started to be consciously. And the first thing it became, what it developed in the animal kingdom, particularly, it became conscious of being a biological body, and we still got that. I'm conscious of being this body, and then it emerged beyond that, and then it became conscious of being a soul, of a psyche, of a story, a hero of a story, and of a narrative, all of that world. And I become conscious of being Tim. So I'm conscious that I'm meeting this Ryan's body, and that's nice. And then, but really, I'm meeting Ryan, and that's something on this transmaterial level. And then what's breaking through now, and is the awakening bit, the new bit, is that you can just be conscious of being, pure being. And at that point, you're reaching out and going, oh, I've individuated so much, but actually I'm the whole universe. I'm everything, individuated as Tim. And that's when I think we start coming into contact with something greater than ourselves, which you could call God, which is why it feels like God is back. It's like, this is what we are unividuating in. It's like when the cells unividuated into us as a body, but what we as souls are unividuating in is something transcendent.
Yes.
Of which we get to.
What you're saying reminds me of another piece in Heidegger's work in Being of Time that I'm reading, and his criticism of Cartesian dualism is he doesn't like how it took body and separates it from mind, and separates soul, and it creates these really hard boundaries. And I think what I'm hearing from what I'm reading in him, which I'm just in the early stages of understanding, and what I'm hearing from you is it's all connected. There, the being is there aren't these like hard boundaries between psyche and body. There's veils. What would you say, Tim? Because
I think it's tricky. I'm a paralogical thinker, so so for me it's like the one is two, and the two are one. So it's a bit like with being and becoming. It's not like, well, there's being and there's becoming. It's being in the process of becoming. It's the same thing, but it is two things as it's one thing as two things. And I feel like that. I feel like there was a great revolt against the old tradition, and I think rightfully, which you see in Descartes. Now, people put it on Descartes, but really, he's just saying what people have always said, and people have said it for a very good reason. If you look at your experience right now of the sensory world, and your experience right now of the meaning of my words, they are utterly different. You couldn't confuse them. You couldn't go, oh, there's the meaning and it's kind of a sensation. It's not a sensation. It has no sensory quality to it whatsoever. The sounds I make and the meaning they have could not be more different. And if you go off into, if you take an object, now I take my cup and then I close my eyes and I imagine my cup, they're utterly different. One is here, made of matter, and one is not. So there is a fundamental difference in our experience between sensation and imagination. And human beings have always noticed that. And so one's the soul and one's the body.
Like
And
Plato's world of forms and things like that.
yeah, although that's an abstraction from it.
Yeah.
But basically what people have from earliest shamanic times has been like, well, we live in this other world, which is not made of matter. We live in, and the story which developed was we've fallen from that into this. And that was that was where Descartes was coming in. So God invented the soul and the body, and he put the soul in the body.
The soul's the stuck in the meat sack type of thing.
Exactly. Yeah. So, and then there's been a revolt against that, and they've gone, oh, look, the psyche is just a byproduct of the body, or it's the subject aspect of the body, as if somehow you can heal this division. Whereas I think the key to it is to go, no, this other transmaterial realm has evolved from the biological realm. But they are distinct.
Yes.
Just like the biological realm is distinct from the physical realm. They are distinct. In the psyche is particularly distinct. But they are connected. There's one flow of emergent form which has arrived there. We've arrived. Let me try it out on you. Let me try this out on you. It's good for me if you don't mind, because it's this is all new for me. Yeah. Because I think so. I described the evolution of consciousness as a response by early life forms to receiving so much information, some of which matters, others doesn't. So you get that prioritizing, and you get the beginnings of what will become what we're experiencing as conscious attention. Now, fundamental for me is that the past, that what exists is a process. The universe is a process. It's time. And that processes are made of time. So the past exists. It hasn't gone anywhere. All that information for everything that's ever occurred is there. And that accumulation of information on every level, that's the wisdom of the universe. That's how it does stuff. That's the algorithms by which it works. That's the habits by which it performs things, including you and me now. All of this that I'm doing is all to do with the algorithms, if you like, of the information.
The things that work.
Right. Yeah. Everything. Everything is an expression of the past in a new way. Everything. So it's a new take on what's happened already, and it contains it. So and up until there was consciousness, all of that has been happening unconsciously because there's no consciousness. It's just happening. Once you've got consciousness of, let's say, make it simple, once you can, like looking at once I can look at the cup, it becomes possible for me also to be conscious of having looked at the cup. I can now be conscious of the past. But there's a fundamental difference when I'm conscious of the past, because when I'm conscious of the cup, there it is. It exists there in its own right. But when I'm conscious of the past, I'm conscious of something that was there. And what you've got is therefore an image of a sensory experience. So you've got, again, once, like just the whole same as in the whole process, you've got something brand new that's never existed before. No longer a sensory experience of the world, but an image of a sensory experience of the world. And when I look at the imagination, that's what it's filled with. And once you've got an image, you can have an image of an image. And it's a bit like one of those looking into one of those cameras where it just goes for infinite, it's like concepts about language, and language will evolve. And suddenly you've got this non-material realm made up of non-material information, which is taken images from sensory experience and created the imaginos, a whole realm of psyche, which has been evolving for a very long time. And in that, we can also process information, what we think is important. And most of it, we're processing all the time, I think, in the psyche, just like we are in the body. And then some of it we pay attention to and we make conscious.
Yes. In your TED Talk, you did an awesome job explaining that as well, because that's still up online, right? The TEDx Berkeley. Yeah, you did a good job explaining how psyche emerges through these images. And what I'm curious about is, well, obviously when we're talking about these images, they're still connected to nature. They're still, you you can do a brain scan. You can see the brain activity happening while we're imagining. It's not like they're cut off from the body. So what you're saying is that they've emerged out of this process. Are you cutting them off for the body? Are you looking at them from a brain perspective? Are you looking at both paralogically, both and? How are you seeing it?
I think increasingly the transmaterial level becomes independent. Until it has a level of complexity that it can function on its own.
That would fit Jung's theory on archetypes to some extent, at least in the sense that they can kind of possess you, or they can kind of overcome your mind somehow.
Yeah, although that could be either. I think that, but I mean that's to do with how you are in the present. You are absolutely linked to what's happened in the past, and that
Evolution.
therefore that what I would call pastivity can erupt at any moment. Well, it's
like aggressive circuits or something.
Yeah, like faulty algorithms. I'm using this algorithm metaphor because it's information. I quite like it. So the universe is learning. It's learning and all the time, and we are it learning now, and its learning is everything it's already done, and the more times it's done it, the more it can repeat it. And so the archetypes are things it's repeated a lot in soul.
Yeah, because especially if you're looking at the biological side of archetypes, where we're always faced with our different circuits and what the impulses of the body wants us to do. So you're talking about the less physical aspect of that.
You see, yeah, the thing I mean, this becomes harder to articulate certainly quickly, but the idea which is in the TED talk, is that through that process, this information exists on two levels at once: the biological and like I think I use the metaphor of the cloud and a computer in the cloud.
Yeah.
But then increasingly, it's able to function just on the cloud, and so that. And that's what spirituality has been concerned with, and there's little things. I mean, I'm no expert on brain stuff, but there's a few, there's a lot. There's a kind of myth around that somehow we can do this and we see where this is happening and all the rest of it. But actually, I came across some evidence which I was there when it was first announced in 1984, I think it was 83 or 84. I went to a lecture by the head of my psychology department at university, a guy called Dr. Ivor Pladel-Pierce, who just said it in passing and blew me away, and no one reacted. And I went up and saw him afterwards, and he just said he'd just been to a meeting where he'd just seen this evidence, and it was a paper published in 84. There's been a whole many more now, of a young man who, to all intents and purposes, didn't have a brain. And it's a medical condition where it's liquid and it pushes the brain out. There's a tiny little bit of brain matter on the outside. But there's no brain inside their head. But he had a first in maths at Cambridge, nevertheless. And now we find, and the research since then has shown that people, there's more and more of these people have been discovered, is that some of them can't function at all, and others of them are quite brilliant. So
they don't have any brain. There's no cerebrum.
Tiny bit around the outside. Tiny bit outside. It's called. I need to
write this down.
Yeah, you should. It's worth checking out. I'll see if I can find you the link.
I have to admit that I'm skeptical, but
yeah, you should be. You should be. But this is actually for real. This is documented neuroscience, and it's so crazy. You just think.
It's just I've never. Heard of it.
I'm going to find the name of the condition.
Yeah, because you can send it to me later if you want. I don't want to make you do it now. Fascinating. That's fascinating. Wow.
Yeah, isn't it?
Yeah, I've been studying quite a bit of genetic and brain science as it pertains to psychology and personality. So I've been in the weeds over the last year or so. So I have a very nuanced perspective of neural circuits and how the genetics of each individual influences those circuits and the way the personality develops and how everybody's different and unique to some extent. So I, at the risk of being reductionistic, I have rooted some of my psychology in quite a bit of my psychology in that understanding. However, I do have this deep sense of soul. I do have this deep sense of knowing and intuition and connection, and I've experienced beautiful synchronicities in my life. I've attended workshops such as your own and had profound experiences. So I'm still, I'll be honest, I'm still wrestling with it all. I mean, there are parts of me that are ready to take a leap into the more ethereal side of things, and then there are parts of me that are like, pump the brakes, let's look at the science, let's look at the research, let's see what we can.
You need to do both. You need to do both. Absolutely. I think what's important, I think, for me, Brian, is just question the assumptions. And there is a reductionist assumption in science, and it's just not worked. It leads to the hard problem of, where does the consciousness come from? Where does psyche come from? What's that? How does a lump of porridge give rise to this? And all of that. And it's an assumption. Whereas if you look at your actual experience, my experience is that my body, and I presume my brain, because I'm presuming I have one, I haven't checked, but is that it's an interface, because you keep saying things to me and it goes through my ears and it goes to my brain, and I understand its meaning. And then I say things back. But look, I'm doing things. I'm making intentions. I'm going to intend to lift the cup. There you go.
Yes.
It looks very much, doesn't it, in your actual experience, like the brain is an interface between what the body does.
Absolutely.
And it's not one way. It's not like, well, the body does something and there's this funny thing, which is we actually experience it as an interface. Well, why don't we take that seriously? Why don't we go, it looks like an interface? And there's a whole realm here, which is the psyche, which you can go off into, which in some way is working with the interface, maybe all of it, maybe not all of it, maybe just some of it, maybe just the lower levels of it interface.
Mm-hmm.
One of the interesting things which somebody I was talking to the other day pointed out to me, I haven't gone and checked it out, but was that in scans of people on psychedelics, where your experience is just crazy, so much happening.
Yeah.
The brain is less active.
Yeah, that's because the synaptic gap widens. And so it's just experience just slows down and opens up, and it's like, it's like just like meditating.
Yeah, except just catch that a minute. Just catch what you said, because the synaptic gap widens.
Yes. Yeah.
But say that's because the synaptic gap widens. It's like, well, why would the synaptic gap widening lead to this? And there'd be less activity when you're actually experiencing far more than you would normally. It's like,
well, I think it's not to get too far into the weeds here, but I do think it's an opening up and of the perceptual circuits that allows us to really enjoy and when sometimes trips aren't enjoyable, of course, but there's an expansion and an enrichment of color. And I do think that
Definitely
has to do with the synaptic gap widening.
I think that's very, very likely.
Yeah.
Obviously it's doing something, and it seems to be that.
Yes.
But you would have thought, this is not an important point for me, but you would have thought, or I would have thought, that if there was so much more experience to be had, that there would be more activity if activity causes experience.
That's right. Yeah, that makes sense. If that was your assumption, then that would be.
Because what seems to happen to me is that actually, that when that gap, so I had it's a very powerful experiences with shamanic stuff, and what came to me immediately after the experience was like, oh, I see, this is toxic. These are intoxicants. It's poison, and the poisons are like creating a gap between the soul and the body, enough that just like when my attention leaves the body at night, I can go off and experience these dreams, which are so vivid, they're more real than real. In the same way that there's a gap, not enough to die, not enough to
Yeah.
split them apart, although if you did enough, they would, but
Yeah.
enough to just open that up, and then suddenly you're free.
That's
And the
right.
body's still doing its thing, but you're just somewhere else.
Beautiful. Yeah. Yeah. I, I do feel like that what you're saying about this emergent field of, and in your book, Soul Story, you articulate the soul very well could go on beyond the body. And you have some very interesting documentation of near-death experiences, and it's like an energy field. It feels to me, at least to me, when I read that, when I think about it for myself, it's this emergent field of energy that has its own being, its own properties, its own consciousness, its own imagination. And so what I'm infinitely curious, go ahead.
I tell you the key thing, I think, with that is to even see the possibility, you have to get rid of the superstition that the world is made of matter, because it just isn't. Matter is a particular level of information.
Yeah.
That, when you go, if you go right down to the beginning, what you end up with is quantum.
Yes.
In the quantum world, you end up with possibility waves. Now, these are mathematically defined.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
And then they collapse into something which you could call matter. So information is, if something's arising from this field of being, formlessness, what is that? Well, it seems like, if you go back to the Tao Te Ching, the 1 becomes 2, the 2 becomes 3, and then you have the 10,000 things. What's that saying? It's saying, look, if you've got something which is just 1, and then there's some differentiation, the most primitive differentiation is that the 1 is now 2. Now you've got relationship. And in relationship, you've got all the numbers, you've got information. So the very first thing, like Pythagoras realized, is the thing we study with maths, which is archetypal relationships, information. So so all of this is information on ever more emergent levels until we get this, which is fantastic. And then we get the psyche. So that the psyche is transmaterial, it's not such a shock. Also, if I'm right that the past hasn't gone anywhere, and I think that will be the biggest shift when we realize that is also information. It's not material. You can't find it in the material world. It's a different, it's pre-existent information. Yeah. And so then it becomes much less startling when you go, well, we've now it's now emerged as a transmaterial level of information. It's like, well, that's not so shocking. It's been like that before. It's like this again. It's only the way we've become rooted in this idea that the real thing is the thing you can touch and hold. This is the real level, rather than it's all real.
Materialism. Yeah.
It's all real.
Yeah.
It's all real.
Absolutely.
And then it's not so much of a shock. And what it allows you to do, and maybe this is the link in with Heidegger as well, I don't know, because I can't remember his stuff well enough, is it goes, look, actually, at least start by trusting your experience. You might be wrong, but at least start with, what's your experience? Well, what's happening? Is, I exist in a material realm and an immaterial realm. That's my experience. Could that be true? My experience,
and that's why you've said science can be soul destroying, because it takes away trust from the experience.
It takes away the soul. It goes, the soul is a byproduct of a piece of meat.
Yeah, and I think that destroys it. I think that depends on the way science is used to some extent, but I think your point is really well taken, because a lot of the times that's the way it's used. It's used as a way to.
It is shocking, Ryan. One of the big things we need to do is notice how reductionist our culture is, and how reductionist we all are, including me. It's like the other day I thought, how many times have I got up on stage to shock people and let them see it in a new way? You might have heard me do it. And I've gone, really what we've discovered is this. It's really empty space. It's 99.999% nothing.
Right.
Now, that is true apart from the word really. But I would usually say that. But that's the reductionism. Oh, it's really the lower levels. No, it's not.
Right. It's all.
It is all of the levels. So what I'm really saying is, on a more primitive level, this is empty space. But on this level, it's my hand.
Yes. Yeah.
And that's what it is. And yet we slip into this kind of feeling that we've got into this, it's like, when I say it's formless, some people hear that's really cold. It's like, oh, it's really just formless. Ooh, it's really just empty. No.
Yeah, it's not really
that
that
has become everything, including love, and it's now full. It would be like me
Beautiful.
talking to you and going, well, Ryan, really, of course, you're an egg and a sperm. I mean, that's really what you are. this
Yes.
Ryan thing is just a kind of a side effect of an egg and a sperm.
You're so right. It's such a tendency for us to,
isn't it,
to do the really just thing. It's really just this. It's really just.
Yeah.
We do it with everything. I want to share something with you because I think this is really important, and I think that your wisdom and life experience could really add some insight. So obviously I'm a lot younger than you. I'm 26, and I'm early on in my philosophical, scientific, spiritual journey. And right now I've gone from infinite possibility, infinite potential, and I've really honed in. I've done, on a little bit of, like I shared, a little harder research, a little more in the weeds. And one of the things that I came up against in the self-help industry that I really don't like is that it has this idea that everybody has infinite potential and you can be anything and crush the day. And, it has these pervasive messages of infinite growth, infinite potential. I hate it because from my perspective, we are grounded in a body, and people have different capacities. For example, you have a great intellectual ability, and what the research that I've encountered points to is that's a genetic gift, at least to some extent. I mean, it's not given universally to all human beings, and that's okay. Just because we aren't literally created equally doesn't mean that the principles of equality don't stand. But I've struggled with this because I feel my soul. I feel my spirituality. I feel my love. The big love that you talk about. I feel intuitions and synchronicities. And I have this deep relationship to that place. And I also know I have limitations in a body, and that as somebody who's in psychology, I don't want clients to think that they can be anything, or they could jump off a building and fly. Like, I want them to understand who they are, that they have these predispositions, that you're not a blank slate or a tabula rasa, as John Locke proposed. And so I know I've been a little stubborn during this conversation in a new way than you're probably used to, but that's because I've seen this kind of all or nothing mentality with spiritual and self-help psychology that just really bothers me. And I'm really trying to find that razor's edge between openness to the infinite possibilities and practicality. And so I would just love to hear, the other thing I want to say to you is that I think one of the major things that I'm coming to, and this is a huge development for my own individuation and self-growth, is that I don't have to agree with everybody I learn from. I don't have to agree with my mentor, Dr. Strachan. I don't have to agree with Carl Jung. I don't have to agree with Tim Freke, who I admire and respect greatly. And I'm telling, this has been huge for me. It's like, oh, I can develop my own ideas. I can be my own philosopher. I can have my own thoughts. It's like, that's where I'm at right now. And I just want to share that with you and see what that generates, or if you have any insight.
I think it generates hurrah.
Yes, exactly.
Yeah, absolutely right. Good for you, and stay with that. Yeah, fantastic. That's a huge place to arrive at. And so the last bit, just hurrah. Just like great. That's exactly, because what from where it looks to me is the universe is the relationship between the parts and the whole. So the universe, it's one thing observing itself from every perspective, and you're a perspective, so you can't possibly have the same perspective as anyone else. That's impossible.
I know. And it's to you, from your life experience, it's like, duh, Ryan, awesome. And you're not saying it in that way, but for me, it's like, when I realize that I have my own right to my critical thinking process, for so long it's been, is it okay that I think this way, or does these people
and it goes on. I mean, part of my reaction to what you said about Heidegger is, and I haven't read Heidegger, and this may be not to do with him, But, you know, for me, and it wasn't that long ago, really. And, you know, and I'm much, much older than you, but it wasn't, you know, I don't know how long ago it was, maybe 10 years or something, when I suddenly went, oh, when I don't understand the person I'm reading, it's not because I'm stupid. It's because they don't know what they're saying.
Wow.
And that changed everything.
Yeah.
And that's why I do everything I can to make sure that I know what I'm saying, so that people can and have a chance of, you know, I can understand. And if they don't know what I'm saying, I probably haven't said it well, because if you say it well, people generally get some idea of what I'm saying. And so, and that was very empowering too, because I was walking around the whole time thinking, well, I'm really dumb compared to all of these people because I don't know what they're saying. Now, that's not true, obviously, if they're speaking a different language. So that, you know, if it's the language of physics, I need to learn that language. Or even in philosophy, if Heidegger's got his own language, I need to learn that language. That's fair enough.
Right.
But then, you know, there needs to be. So that's on that one. The other point you're making was, I was really, about this kind of new agey spiritual inlanders. God, yeah, I want to do a little thing on stupid spiritual ideas, and that's definitely one of them.
Please enlighten me, because I get so upset.
I mean, there's so many stupid spiritual ideas, and they're very well-meaning. They want to go, you can be everything, and it sounds great until you think about it, and then it's just stupid and rather depressing. You know, it's like, you know, it's a bit too late for me to be a ballet dancer. It's just too late. You know, I'm never going to be a professional footballer, you know, or whatever. And it's our particularness. I'm not sure it's necessarily genetic. I think that might be another prejudice we're suffering from at the moment, that we've kind of gone down that one particular metaphor at the moment.
Let's bookmark that for a debate for another time.
You know, it's like everything's genetics, you know, and then culture becomes genetics, and then everything is like, and actually, well, there's so little information.
Right.
But anyway, leave that aside. But certainly, it's just, you know, clearly, and you're right. What we need to do is give each other. Now, but here's the thing: because what's stretching in front of us is infinite.
Yeah.
There is infinite possibility in a sense. But it must transcend and include everything that Tim's already been. Yeah. So if it can transcend and include everything that Tim's already been, that can happen. But if it can't, then it can't happen. And it's the particularness of us that's where the creativity is as well. Because then it's like, okay, what can you make of Ryan? You're this particular collection of, and it's totally unique. And you will be better and worse than everyone. Every quality that you have, you'll be able to go, oh, they're better at it and they're worse, you know, from your height to your everything. But the unique combination that comes together in you has never come together in anyone else.
Exactly. Yes. And I think that's not just a limitation. That's a blessing.
It is. Absolutely.
I get to live a unique life.
Yeah. And that's the creativity that happens for you, through you, with you. Yeah. But you know, it's the other one that I was thinking about the other day. I just, you know, everyone's perfect. You're really perfect, Ryan, already. You know, it's like, if you just, and it's like, you know, we're born perfect. What? We're not. We're really not. You know, and what it mistakes again is it's kind of reductionist. It's like but from the spiritual angle. Yes. So we have this very, very negative view that the beautiful souls are born into the world and then they're all fucked up. And so the job is to unfuck people.
I think there's actually a book out on the market called Unfuck Yourself right now.
Oh, really? There you go. See, that will sell well. Much better than mine. And rather than what seems true to me, which is we're in an emergent universe and we all can reach further and further towards a greater good. And when we do, it's amazing. And that's not beyond anyone. Anyone is redeemable. But that's not where we start. That's where we're going.
Uh-huh.
That's where we move towards. And, you know, I'm not saying that kids aren't beautiful when they're born. I'm not saying that, you know, it's just that we're born where we are. And then we come into a culture, which is where it is. And then with a bit of luck, we move it forward. And we bring a little bit more goodness, a bit more wisdom, a bit more love into the world.
Yes. Yeah, I love that. It's beautiful. The other piece that gets used is this whole attraction piece that is in The Secret and The Answer and use spirituality to become a millionaire type of. What do you think about all that?
Again, I'm a paralogical thinker, so I'll have to say two sides. One side of it's bullshit, and one side of it's not. So the bullshit is it ultimately it becomes solipsistic, because it basically goes, you're creating your own life. Well, if I'm creating my own life, I've just created you coming to have a conversation with me. I've created, my wife deciding to marry me. It's all me. I've got all these beautiful things. I have a lovely relationship with you as a friend. I have a lovely relationship with my wife as my partner, and I attracted it all to me. And so what do you just kind of, you become these pawns in my game, and obviously horrible rubbish.
Right.
But
yeah, that's not right.
No, it's just like, and it's what it does is it takes it, but there is something going on there.
Yeah.
And what happens a lot in spirituality. It's a bit like, take your early thing about potentiality.
Mm-hmm.
Actually, Ryan has an immense amount of potentiality, of which he's probably conscious of a tiny, tiny amount. And so the point of going, hey, Ryan, you've got far more potential than you possibly imagine, that's a good thing.
Yes.
But then to go, you've got infinite potentiality to do everything, is just rubbish. The same with the way the magic works. But I do think one of the things which I've set out to try and understand with the idea of narrativity is, in my experience, it does happen. And it's happened enough that I want to understand. It feels to me that this information, this evolving of information, these algorithms, if you like, of existence, have arrived at a narrative level, so that now what was biology has become a story.
Beautiful.
And that we are now living in a story interacting with a biological and physical universe, and those all exist together. And sometimes the story becomes really, really obvious.
I love that. And there's no doubt in my, I know a lot of people haven't had the blessing of experiencing it, but just I've had so many amazing synchronicities. I've said that 3 times now. Just even with meeting you, the timing was impeccable. I don't understand it. I don't know why some people seem to report it more than others. I don't know if some souls are more receptive or more whatever. I don't like to do comparisons. But
it can just get so much, can't it? I mean, just look, these are minor things. These are not things which, if someone heard them, they wouldn't go, wow. I could give you quite a few of those actually, but it's the little things. It's like the whole thing is doing. It's not like it happens sometimes. It's always happening to some degree. Yes. So I just go for a walk. What am I thinking about? Being. I come to speak with Ryan. What's the first thing he says? I'm reading Heidegger on being. Now, that's not a blow your mind coincidence, but it's the sort of thing that happens all the time. So before I spoke to you, I spoke to a guy in France, and he pretty much about my work, about how to take it out into the world. And he said exactly the same things that have been said to me by an Australian I spoke to very, very late last night. I haven't talked to anyone about any of this stuff, and then suddenly 2 of them saying the same thing. Wow. And those things happen, I think, to us a lot. And there's kind of a patterning, a story level to life.
That's amazing.
And we need to just see that. And again, once you get, if I say, if you look at a computer game and you go, well, it's, algorithms all the way down, and it's affecting, and it's affecting the game you're playing, you're going to go, yeah, that's, of course.
And that's how Sam Harris looks at life.
Uh-huh.
It's algorithms all the way down.
Yeah.
He doesn't even believe in free will, which I love Sam Harris. Actually, I find him quite soothing to listen to because he's so articulate. But I hate his idea on free will so much.
It's a ghastly idea. Horrible,
I love so many of his ideas.
It's a reductionist idea.
Yeah. I know. And for a guy that is such a proponent of meditation and making good choices, it's just so.
He can't be a proponent of making good choices, not if he thinks there's no free will.
Right. Well, yeah. But he says, he'll say well, it's not that I can't make choices. It's just that I have no choice but to make those choices. Yeah, so he still does. He is a proponent of free will without being a proponent of free will. Somehow he tries to.
Yeah, I think it's because he wants both, and he can have both.
Right.
I think he can have both because, the thing which is creating everything, that field of being is the thing which is conscious through us, is arising as us, makes choices through us, but it makes choices through us.
Yes.
And that's what will is, isn't it? It's just that I can make a choice, that the choice comes through me, so that when I reflect on the possibility, shall I or not, that it's able to then respond from the whole collective of my experience and choose.
Yes.
And that feels like that's really significant. And
that is significant. And to say that it's not ours, that we don't have it, that's just so debilitating as a
I suspect for Sam, I've listened to Sam a fair bit because he is a beautiful thinker, but I get that. I think for Sam, he would resist the idea that the psyche is another level of information. So he wouldn't.
No. I'm agreeing. Absolutely, yeah.
So once you do that, what you're faced with is, oh, really? It's a biological process. So now there's no room. If I say, look, it's happening, it's a psychological process. The information, the algorithms are happening in a non-material psychological level. Then you can see I'm making the choice, and then I make the choice, and then that interfaces with the brain, which is the interface system, and then my body moves. That becomes like free will. But if it's just the body, and this is some side effect, then it's kind of you've lost that, haven't you? You've just ended up with the body doing things.
Because I think and I gotta go here in a minute because I have an appointment. But I think the body.
Look at the time, man. We've been chatting for an hour.
Time exists, right, Tim? Actually, a lot of times when I'm addressing you in email, I don't know why this is. I always accidentally put an E after, so I always have time freak on there. It's so funny, but I always think of that. I'm like, oh my God, it's sacred, Tim and time. It's like his sacred totem, his sacred relation. That's one of your key messages is about time that I appreciate about you. So anyways, but I think what we can take from the biology though is that for example, if you have an enlarged amygdala, you're going to experience life in slightly different ways psychologically. The way that you imagine your own narrativity is going to be impacted.
Yeah, but I mean, I'll give you. I mean, this analogy was given to me actually by that guy Ivor Pleidel-Pierce, who was, he was the head of psychology at, professor at the university, and that was whatever it was 40 years ago.
Yes,
and he was saying, look, he said, look, I've started to think of the brain more like, I think the metaphor then, because a long time ago, was a radio.
Yes. Yeah.
So that but if you think about the TV, I mean, I certainly felt when my mum was dying, and she was, all sorts was going on for her, and it was because of what was happening to her body. I mean, it really felt like the TV was on the blink. It was like it was coming in and out. So it's like if I got my speakers and I play music and then I break one of the speakers, it will go like that.
Yes.
And it feels like you do the same. If I do something to my brain, it will. Yes. The same thing will happen. Yeah. But the music is not the speakers.
No, that's right. I love that. That's beautiful. That's a great way of putting it. I love it. I think the first time I met you, I shared with you one of my favorite things in my Gestalt therapy training is that the whole is greater than the sum of its parts. It's one of my favorite things that the Gestalt people came up with.
That's it. That's got that whole. That's what I mean by emergentism as the opposite of reductionism. So every time a new whole arises objectively and subjectively, you get something which has never existed before, and it cannot be reduced to its parts.
Yeah, and we can't make statements about the whole by looking at one part and saying, like you said, it's really just this. Yeah. It's really just I think that's such an important thing that you're saying. I want to share before we end. I just want to share what I really felt was so touching when I thought about you the other day. Is I just had this overwhelming feeling of love and appreciation and admiration that the way that I view you, my potentially partly my own projection, but I think it's real as well, is you're so authentic. The videos, the way that you share your own experience, like the videos you have on your channel, the man behind the mask or whatever it's called. You're not hiding anything. You're sharing you're not hiding any of your cards. You say, this is what I've got. This is who I am. This is how I see it. that's so refreshing in a world where we're always paranoid of, you know, what someone's really after. And with you, I just feel it's just right there. It's just like, here I am. This is me. It's very vulnerable, courageous, and it's a model for how I think our intellectual and spiritual teachers need to be moving forward, because it's not exemplified very often the way that you do it. And I know that I'm being a little gushy, but I really feel that way. I really feel that way.
Well, I'm really touched to hear that, Ryan. That means a lot to me. And my greatest aspiration as somebody who's heading towards, you know, the last phase of his life is to do something of value to those people who are coming in to the main phase of their life, like you.
Yes.
I can't think of anything, you know, I like etymology. And at one point I thought, you know, what is the meaning of success? What does the word mean? So I looked into the etymology of it, and it comes from the same root as when we say that the generations succeed each other. And I really liked that, because it felt like, yeah, that's what success is. Success is making things better for those that succeed you.
Oh, that's so cool. I love that. That's a great one.
Isn't it?
That's a great one.
So
you've certainly done that. You've certainly done that.
That's very cool.
So, yeah. All right, Tim, I gotta get in my car and drive to an appointment. Thank you so much.
It was really great to chat with you.